So if you've been on my channel for a little while now, or you happen to watch my movie-length video discussing the topic, then you'd know that Bendy and the Ink Machine is my favorite horror game of all time. It may not be a perfect game by any means, but Bendy is a game and franchise that I hold very near and dear to my heart. So you can probably imagine the insane amount of excitement I felt when this November it was revealed that the game's sequel, Bendy and the Dark Revival, would finally be releasing only 2 weeks after the trailer. Seriously, this game was basically radio silent for 3 years straight, leading many fans of the franchise, including myself, to believe that we were never going to get to experience it. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, we find out not only was the game still being worked on, but that it was going to be releasing the same month we found this out. Needless to say, I and many other fans of the franchise absolutely lost our minds at this news. The 2 weeks leading to this game's release were quite possibly the longest 2 weeks of my entire life. I was so excited, but also so nervous that the game wouldn't be able to recapture what it was that made me love the original game in the first place. All that said though, after the wait was finally over, I managed to get my hands on a copy of the game, which, might I add, was generously given to me for free by the Meatly himself, which is still something so surreal to me that I still need time to process that it even happened. Thank you, that is insane. So, with the game bought and many of my viewers eager to find out my opinion on it, I streamed the Dark Revival on release day. And oh my god, words cannot properly describe the sheer amount of joy this game brought me. I am dead serious when I say that Bendy and the Dark Revival is an improvement to the original in almost every single way. It took everything I loved about the original game and amplified it in a way I could never have expected, while also taking the main problems I had with it and either completely removing them or remedying them in some small way. The gameplay is far less tedious and boring. The visuals have been completely revamped in a way that makes the game look far more polished, while not losing that old Bendy charm. And the story of the game is not only insanely interesting on its own, but works to completely change the way we look at the original Bendy game. All of this, on top of a much greater emphasis on horror, led to this game being one of the most enjoyable experiences I've ever had playing a game. I loved this game so much that by the end of my original stream where I played it, I literally started crying over it. Oh my god! Oh my god. Oh my, I'm actually getting tears in my eyes, chat. Whoa. You can call me dramatic all you want, and you're definitely right about that. But that's genuinely how I felt about this game. And in this video, I want to try and help you understand why. In this video, I plan to go over the 4 main elements that I feel were vastly improved in this game over the original, to hopefully give you a greater appreciation for everything that went into it. I plan to discuss the gameplay, the art direction, the horror, and the story of this game, going over my favorite parts of each and explaining how they all come together to create what is now my favorite installment of the entire Bendy franchise. So, without further ado, let's delve back into the cycle with Bendy and the Dark Revival. The gameplay of the original Bendy and the Ink Machine was probably the most criticized element in the entire game, and I can definitely see why. Very often, the slow movement and clunky combat, as well as the sheer amount of fetch quests the game asked of you, led it to becoming very boring in the worst parts of the game. Combine this with how glitchy the game was in later chapters, and you have a very flawed experience from a gameplay perspective. Perhaps one of the biggest improvements made with the Dark Revival, though, is how it completely overhauled the way the Bendy franchise plays to make it a much more enjoyable experience. Minor things like the running speed have been improved immensely, making Audrey feel a whole lot less slow to control and making traversing the map a lot more bearable. As well as this, there have been several new abilities added to the player's kit which make the overall experience far more interesting than it ever was before. The most notable of these new abilities include Audrey's ability to banish enemies, as well as her ability to teleport. Using the new banishment mechanic, we're able to take advantage of stealth to sneak up behind enemies, killing them instantly. This new tool at our disposal is extremely useful for clearing areas of enemies and very satisfying to pull off effectively. It works very well too with our other main ability, the teleport. By right-clicking, we're able to blink in any direction we're looking, leaving behind a neat little inky trail behind us. This tool works very well in conjunction with the banishment, with many of the enemies I was able to kill being done so by teleporting right up behind them when they least expected it. It's also very useful for evading attacks, with many encounters and boss fights being made easier by blinking away at the very last second before an attack was supposed to connect. All of these different uses, as well as the map traversal it's made for, make the teleport a very essential and versatile tool that we have at our disposal. Both of these new mechanics make the Dark Revival far more complex and interesting than the original Bendy ever was, giving players new ways they can use them to get themselves out of what could be very stale moments of gameplay in the previous installment. But what if I told you that the new mechanics introduced by this game are only a small part of how much better this game is to play? You see, perhaps the biggest and most glaring issue the previous installment of Bendy had was the tedium of backtracking and constantly doing fetch quests. It felt like every single objective in the game was tied to some kind of fetch quest, with Chapter 3 specifically being extremely guilty of this flaw. It didn't take away too much from my own personal experience with the game, but it was a major frustration for a lot of other people who played it. The Dark Revival fixes this issue by completely and fundamentally changing how we progress through it. Now, this is gonna sound weird at first, but what if I told you that the Dark Revival has an almost Metroidvania-esque style to its world and level design? Let me explain. While playing through the Dark Revival, we the player gain the abilities we need to use to traverse the map very gradually. We start the game with absolutely nothing on us, and as we go, we gain new upgrades, abilities, etc. When we encounter a new location that's blocked off to us, we usually end up taking a completely different route, encountering new objectives and story beats along the way, until eventually finding a new tool or ability which allows us to return and get past the old hurdle. Take, for example, this pit we encounter very early on in the game. The gap in the pit is way too large to be jumped over, and there's a special lock on the door on the other side which we can't open normally. Naturally, we look for another way out of here, which leads us to a small opening behind a cart. All of this leads us down a chain of events which results in us encountering swarms of ink searchers, having our first encounter with the ink demon, discovering a new member of the Butcher Gang, and eventually introducing us to a new character named Porter, who gives us our teleport ability that we need to cross the gap. What I'm trying to say here is, there are many different roadblocks and pathways which appear in the Dark Revival, which we can always come back to later when we've progressed in other parts of the game. If we see a door which we can't open, then we can return later once we've got upgrades to our pipe we need to unlock it. If we see a gap, we can wait until we get the teleport to cross it. I've always been obsessed with this style of world design in any games that have them. It gives the game a sense of coherence, like I'll always be rewarded for exploring every nook and cranny the game has to offer. If the scenario I described earlier were to be presented in the original Bendy, I feel like it would just spark the beginning of some massive fetch quest to collect enough resources to close the gap. This one presents objectives like this in a much more natural manner, making it so the solution is something we come across while fulfilling other parts of the story as they're presented to us. This style of story progression, as well as the new and altered mechanics of the Dark Revival, make it a much more competent game to play, which actually rewards the player for their exploration and mastery of the tools it provides them. But the improvements seen here are far from where the changes end with the Dark Revival. One major change that is immediately noticeable from the moment we start the game is the general art direction, which I'd love to discuss here next. So let's do just that. Unlike the gameplay of the original Bendy and the Ink Machine, the art direction was quite possibly the most beloved part of the entire game. I feel like the unique art style was what put Bendy on the map in the first place, with many people, including myself, being pulled into its world by the idea of a horror game playing off the art style of old rubber hose animation. And for the most part, I feel like Bendy's art style still holds up extremely well. Traversing the world of the original Bendy is always such an interesting experience to me, with it all being bathed in this deep sepia tone and the textures looking like they've been crudely sketched on with a pen. The characters and enemies were always this unique blend of real creatures and cartoons, with many of the most iconic designs like the Ink Demon looking like a horrible hybrid of both. With all that praise given to the original though, I must say that the Dark Revival's art direction far exceeds what the original was able to do. Bendy and the Dark Revival is a beautiful game which takes advantage of what made the original art design so charming, while also improving upon it and doing things with it that the original game never even tried to. We get to see massive cities basked in a warm light from the window of a comfortable lounge, disgusting sewer systems full of pipes and strange cultic banners, and we even get to see old locations from the previous game, now altered and destroyed, shells of their former selves, yet somehow more massive and beautiful than they once were. And even on the rare occasions where the game decides to defy what the visual aesthetic is going for, it usually does it in such a way that makes the location more visually striking. Take, for example, the laboratory of Wilson. As we descend down the stairs towards this room, we first see a barrel spilling a glowing liquid on the ground. This wouldn't be too out of place if not for the fact that the liquid coming out of this barrel is a rainbow color. Continuing down the hallway, we see pipes filled with the same rainbow liquid, and soon after, the very walls of the location are painted with it. It's the first time ever that the setting of the cycle sees any color beyond the sepia tone we've come to associate it with, making it almost feel alien and out of place. And it's these bright colors which we come to associate with Wilson's influence. The signal towers which mute our powers as Audrey and ward off the Ink Demon are also covered in these rainbow colors, making them extremely striking and almost out of place wherever they are, further selling the idea that they were put in this world without its consent. And that's one of the biggest reasons I feel like the visuals of this game are a vast improvement over what the original Bendy was capable of. It's one thing to be able to adhere to the visual aesthetic the game is known for, but to me it's something else entirely to know how to effectively break those design rules to make something visually striking. And the Dark Revival does this phenomenally. And speaking of striking, let's talk about the character designs in this game. As well as improving upon the environmental design of the original Bendy, the Dark Revival does an amazing job at not only revamping the designs of old characters, but giving us some brand new character designs which I am obsessed with. The most notable improvement I noticed with the character designs in this game came in the form of the actual human characters. In the original Bendy, the only truly human character we got to see was Joey Drew at the end, and he looked just alright to me. The only other human characters we had were the two different versions of Alice, who were still very much so cartoons in many ways. In this game though, we see a lot more proper human characters at play. Our character Audrey has two whole models that we constantly see from our POV, and the game's main villain, Wilson, is shown to us right from the start of the game. Even characters like Henry, who was just a faceless protagonist in the original game, was given a proper face that we could attach to the name. What I love so much about having these models and characters in place is that not only does it give us a way of connecting who was actually created in the cycle and who came from the real world, but it also gives more life to the characters who were originally faceless. I found it much easier to become attached to a character like Henry Stein once I actually had a face to associate the character with, and the same goes for Audrey. But it's not just the human characters who've been vastly improved in this game. The new designs we got for the different ink creatures, both new and old, are all massive steps up from the way they looked before. The Butcher Gang is far more intimidating and animated, with the new member, the Slicer, having easily one of the scariest designs in the game. The Lost Ones are far more expressive, with their faces and inky bodies having a lot more complex animation and personality. Boss fights like the spider creature in the pit or the final boss are massive and intimidating, and Alice is somehow even hotter than she was in the previous game. Like, let me sit on her lap! Among all these great new designs though, there are two main ones I'd like to key in on. The first of these two designs comes in the form of the game's brand new enemies, the Keepers. These guys fulfill a projectionist sort of role for the Dark Revival, and they're easily one of the coolest enemies in the entire game. Their bodies are almost serpent-esque, with long cables making up their lower halves which drag along the floor like tails. They have this disturbing blend of mechanical parts, organic flesh, and ink which make them look like some kind of horrible experiment Wilson conducted after taking control of the cycle. And much like the projectionist, they have these large spotlights for faces which act as a warning sign when one is close by and you need to hide. I find that these enemies are so unique and alien compared to the other creatures in the Dark Revival, and that easily makes them one of the most unique and interesting to me. The other new design I'd like to discuss here belongs to that of the Ink Demon himself. When it came to redesigning the original cast of characters for this game, it was clear that above all else, the design of Bendy himself had to be a memorable one. And my god, they did not hold back when making this guy. The original design for the Ink Demon was very good in its own way. I always loved how it looked like some kind of rotten corpse drowned in ink, with bits of rib and spine being outlined by the liquid running down its body. For this game though, they took the Ink Demon in a whole other direction. Rather than looking vaguely human, Bendy in this game plays far more into his demon theme, sporting massive horns, segmented teeth, and massive goat-like legs which end in hooves. While I may love the original Ink Demon design and what it had going, this one is much more intimidating than that one ever was. When we see him coming after us in-game, he absolutely towers over us, barely being able to fit in the hallways he roams. In some parts, he's even shown moving like an animal, playing more into the idea that he's some kind of territorial predator that kills anything it sees. This was a massive improvement to me from the original Bendy, making him a much more memorable and intimidating antagonist. But it wasn't just Bendy's design that was greatly improved in this game. As well as a much more iconic design, the creators of this game went out of their way to make the Ink Demon, as well as several other aspects of the Dark Revival, much scarier than the original ever was. So, with that said, I'd love to take a look at that next. While the original Bendy and the Ink Machine may have been my favorite horror game, I feel like something it always lacked in was the horror department. I love the world, story, and characters of it, but save for a couple of small moments in the original, I could never really call it terrifying. And if I'm being completely honest, I didn't really expect to find the Dark Revival all that scary either. Maybe it was because I anticipated it to have a similar tone and atmosphere to the original, but horror was not something I was expecting to be a major focus of this game. That was until I actually opened the game and saw the title screen. Something about this particular title screen was far more ominous than the original Bendy's ever was, and it gave me a sense of excitement at the possibility of this game actually delivering in some way in the horror department. And as I began to play, these plot twists— I was very pleasantly surprised. Bendy and the Dark Revival is actually a really scary game at times that has a great understanding of its own atmosphere and horror. It takes advantage of simple mechanics and atmosphere to create an experience where the player never truly feels safe while playing it. Just roaming around the cycle already is far more dreadful than we ever saw in the original Bendy. At times you can hear the faint sound of crying in the distance, coming from an unidentifiable source. Sometimes things happen in the environment which catch us off guard, like the sudden shaking of the room we're in, or random scripted encounters with the Butcher Gang, locking doors or slamming their faces against where we're trying to go. These random events alone create a much more off-putting atmosphere than the original Bendy ever had going for it. And that's even before I discuss the many monsters which make this game go from unsettling to downright terrifying. Now, when discussing the enemies in the Dark Revival, there are three main ones that I feel contribute the most to the horror. The first ones I'd like to discuss are the Keepers I brought up earlier. These guys are easily the scariest of what I'll be calling the traditional enemies in this game, the ones that simply roam the environment and chase us when we're spotted. The Keepers to me are terrifying for a couple of reasons. The first reason being just the way they're presented. I already talked about how weird and alien their designs look, but one thing about them that freaked me out a lot was the way they sound. Their voices sound like strange screaming, with many different glitches and bits of lag happening alongside them to almost make it sound like they're trying desperately to communicate through some kind of broken technology. What the fuck? Who the fuck are you? And when they're not speaking, we can usually hear some kind of buzzing sound which coincides with their strained breaths as they roam the environment looking for us. Sound design aside though, the other major thing that makes these enemies so scary to deal with is just how vulnerable we the player are to them. The Keepers cannot be killed, they nearly kill you in a single hit if they catch you, and the area where we encounter the most of them is one where Audrey's powers are completely nullified. In order to get past the Keepers, we have to be stealthy, and if we are unfortunate enough to be seen, we have to run for our lives. And being chased by these guys is a panic-inducing scenario. The chase always starts with the sound of this horrible screeching from them, signaling that you've been seen. And as we run away, there's this terrifying chase music that plays over the entire thing. The Keepers are fast and relentless, and will continue chasing you until you've either run out of stamina, or you're fortunate enough to get to a hiding spot. Encante. Oh shit! Where the hell? Okay. Jesus.
Like concerned expression.
No! Oh, fuck. Oh, shit. These guys were easily the scariest of the traditional enemies in the game, which really adds on to why I consider them my favorites. However, they're far from the scariest thing this game introduced. While they may be terrifying in their own ways, they do not compare to the other two monsters I'm about to talk about. The next enemy I'd love to talk about is the Butcher Gang, or more specifically, the newest member of the Butcher Gang, Carly, also known as the Slicer. This fucking enemy was quite possibly the scariest thing I've had to deal with in a horror game in a very long time. And I knew I was in for something bad from the moment I first met her. Oh no! Oh, they're making me do it! Hello? Hello? Oh, please don't jump scare me! Please don't jump scare me! Oh no! Oh no! Oh! Oh dear God! What? Oh! What? Oh! What? Oh, I don't like that! Oh, I don't like that! Oh no! As soon as you let this stupid ghost out of the box, your playthrough becomes hell. Allow me to explain how Carly works. You see, after Carly is freed from the box, she's free to show up whenever the hell she wants. Without warning. At any point while you're playing the game after the damn box is open, no matter where you are or what you're doing, there's a chance that Carly will just appear right in front of you with an ear-splitting scream trying to kill you. You cannot get rid of her, you cannot kill her, and there is no way to avoid her spawning in. This mechanic ruined me. Having the constant looming threat of a monster appearing right in front of you when doing literally anything spiked my anxiety in a way I never expected the game to do. And you see, the thing about this little mechanic is it gets you one way or another. If you're afraid of getting jump scared by Carly, there's this constant, unshaking feeling of dread as you painstakingly wait for her next appearance until eventually it happens. And if you happen to forget about her, God forbid, she makes sure to remind you at the worst possible times. Don't believe me? Let's take a look at my many encounters with her during my first stream of the game. Oh no. Oh no 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 no. Oh no 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 no. This is where I came from. Oh no 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 no. Ah! Oh hey, lever now. I hate you! That you made a place for them to slip. Oh my God! Oh! Oh! That's horrible. Ah!
Those are fighting words.
Ah! You can't keep throwing these. You can't keep throwing these plot twists. Ah! Ah! Chad, I need a minute. Chad, I need a minute. Chad, I need a minute. I need some water. This enemy was easily the scariest to me. Her one simple mechanic made it so that even in the safest environments, I was constantly on edge, waiting for something to happen even when she never ended up appearing. She spiked my anxiety more than any other enemy in a horror game has in a while, and for that reason, I have a very strong appreciation as well as a very strong hatred for her. And she isn't even the last character I intend to talk about in this segment. You see, while Carly may be who I view as the scariest enemy in the game, she isn't actually one that you necessarily have to deal with. She only becomes active if you choose to open her box, which is an entirely optional thing you can do. This makes it so the terror she brings by being active is something that's entirely self-imposed on the player, a consequence for being curious. An enemy with a similar mechanic to her, one which isn't optional to deal with, is the game's titular character, Bendy. Now, in my original video discussing Bendy and the Ink Machine, I discussed what it was that I really loved and hated about the way they handled the Ink Demon, more specifically how he was treated in Chapter 3. To those who are unaware or need a refresher, the Ink Demon had a mechanic in Chapter 3 that I was very fond of when I played the game, and still am. Basically, if you stayed in one location for too long, either fighting enemies or looking for items, Bendy would spawn in and begin roaming around. If he spotted you, he would chase you, which would result in an instant death unless you found somewhere to hide. I adored this mechanic. It made Bendy out to be this incredibly intimidating threat, one which constantly loomed over you and gave you a sense of urgency that no other character did. My main issue with this mechanic, though, is that it was exclusive to Chapter 3. Every other mechanic with Bendy before and after Chapter 3 was completely scripted, which felt like a major letdown considering how much I loved this mechanic. The Dark Revival fixes this by not only bringing this mechanic back for the entire game, but it also does so in a much more terrifying manner. Rather than Bendy slowly roaming the halls of whatever area he spawns in, staying in one place for too long results in Bendy being heard quickly approaching the area with heavy footsteps. When you hear him approaching, you have to drop everything you're currently doing to run and find a hiding place as quickly as humanly possible. If you fail to do so, he finds you, and it's game over. This mechanic is perfect to me. It makes the Ink Demon an ever-present threat, one which we constantly have at the back of our minds from the moment he becomes active in the game. And because it can happen at any given point, assuming we've stayed in one spot for too long, he can start making his way towards us at very inopportune times. I've had points in my own playthroughs where I just barely managed to make it to a hiding spot right before he caught me, and the sheer amount of panic and relief those moments brought me gave me a strong appreciation for just how effective this mechanic is. Bendy isn't just tied to this one mechanic though. There are plenty of other scripted events with the character that also happen alongside this mechanic to constantly remind you that he's out there, trying to find you. Things like seeing him in an elevator we're actively trying to get to, having him block a hallway we're actively trying to go down, and seeing his shadow in the distance as we go towards it are all examples of how Bendy continues to have this strong, threatening presence throughout the game. It makes him a much more intimidating antagonist when combined with his new design and voice, and makes him much more deserving of being the character the game is actually named after. Overall, the horror of this game, to me, is easily the second biggest improvement it has to offer over the original Bendy and the Ink Machine. But it certainly isn't the last. You see, I've been saving the point I feel the most strongly about in the game for last, and now that we're here, I can finally discuss the story. So out of everything I've discussed in this video so far, this is definitely the most divisive aspect of the original Bendy and the Ink Machine. The story of Bendy is one that definitely is very flawed in some departments, but one that I found myself extremely invested in. I feel like I was in the very rare minority that actually really liked the ending for what it was. However, I definitely won't argue that it had no proper build-up and felt like it happened out of completely nowhere. Many of the issues with Bendy's story, in my opinion, are due to the fact that the narrative of the game was definitely made as the story went on. Each chapter abruptly introduced something new with little to no foreshadowing or build-up, making it feel like a very disconnected experience. And while I loved the story for what it was, I can't deny that as being a glaring issue with how that game was structured. Bendy and the Dark Revival fixes these problems in several ways. Being a game that was made as one complete product rather than being constructed chapter by chapter, the game is able to tell a narrative that is all very coherent and properly structured. Things have proper build-up, ideas that are introduced get properly explored, and above all else, the game has an ending that feels properly earned with how the story set it up. This on top of the fact that the Dark Revival actually attempts to explain the original Bendy story, not only makes it a more enjoyable experience in and of itself, but also one that enhances the experience that the first game has to offer. And stuff like this is why this segment of the video is definitely going to be the longest. This portion of the game is easily the one I feel the strongest about, with many different aspects of the story the Dark Revival tells being something I really want to talk about. So I'm going to do just that. In this segment, I'm going to sort of summarize all the major points in the game's story, making occasional stops to discuss aspects that I really enjoy about them. So if we're ready for that, let's get started. So right off the bat, the Dark Revival opens with a very interesting cutscene which had my attention right from the get-go. We see a ransacked version of Joey Drew's old apartment, destroyed in what looked like some kind of struggle. Audrey narrates over the opening, talking about the past and how it can come back to haunt you, right before cutting away as something slams on the door. Next thing you know, we're inside Audrey's office, seeing her work away drawing Bendy cartoons until she decides to get up to get a cup of coffee. And then the gameplay properly begins. Not too much happens in this opening until eventually we have a run-in with the creepiest, most crusty-looking janitor of all time, Wilson, who accompanies us until the elevator breaks down and we go to try and repair it. After a bit more talking and walking around a Joey Drew exhibit, Wilson takes us to the ink machine, remarking about how annoyed he is that people have messed with the most bizarre exhibits of all time and then sending us to go fetch them from different parts of the room. Now, this is a very small detail to bring up, but I do really like that all the items we're meant to grab here are the same ones from the first fetch quest in Bendy Chapter 1. It's a neat little callback to the original game, which immediately made it clear that some care for the original was put into this game when it was being made. It also sort of plays into the whole idea that this series is looping on itself, with Chapter 5 ending on Chapter 1 and the Dark Revival picking up on the same fetch quest Chapter 1 started with. One fetch quest later, though, we finally turn the lever which activates the ink machine, and after an ominous monologue from Wilson which reveals his true intentions, we're thrusted into the game with a badass title card. After Audrey wakes up in the cycle, she stares in horror as she's now become an ink creature herself, and with that we're free to explore our new surroundings. Looking at our immediate area, we notice a couple interesting tidbits, mainly the posters on the wall depicting Wilson, telling the residents of the cycle that he had slain the ink demon and was their new protector. It seems like in the time spent after we became a part of this place, Wilson took it as an opportunity to try and take control of the cycle, with his claim to fame being the supposed feat of destroying its old leader, Bendy. Not too much of note happens after this until eventually we climb this wall and are immediately met with the Piper, who is scared away by the first friendly face in the game, Allison, who tries to help us out. After our conversation with her, we do a whole lot of exploring, fighting enemies, collecting objects, you get the idea. All of this until eventually, while traveling down a dark tunnel, we meet the most adorable, perfect little man on the planet, and I became a father! Little Bendy! Little guy! Oh, it's a little dude! Oh! Hi! Hi! Hi there! Hello! Oh my god! You should look at his little face! He's wearing a so I'm bringing him up right now because he's really important to the story, but also, like, how can you not love him? Just look at him. He's a baby. He's my son and I love him. I would kill for him. He's perfect and I would kill any and everyone for him. He deserves it. I love him. He's perfect. So as we come through this doorway and encounter the new little Bendy, we try to befriend him until Audrey scares him away with her powers. Remember this moment. This will be important later. Immediately following this heartbreaking scene is when we first get properly introduced to the Ink Demon. At first, we only hear him speak to us through the halls of the studio, with a faint shadow outlining him in the distance. As we make it to this door though, he appears behind us, attempting to grab us as we lock the door. It seems like the Ink Demon wasn't as dead as Wilson first made him out to be. No, in fact, in many ways, the Ink Demon seems more alive and intelligent than he ever was before. He's more monstrous, more dangerous, and now has a deep, gravelly voice which he uses to speak to us throughout the game when we least expect it. I appreciate here that the Ink Demon was treated as a much stronger piece of the story than he was in the original Bendy. In that game, he obviously had a lot of relevance, but he often felt like a background character which only ever appeared for 1 or 2 scary moments in a chapter. In this game, it feels like everything revolves around him, like he's the thing that pushes the story forward. And speaking of that, we continue the story after surviving in the demon's domain, collecting different drawings for a very sad lost one until eventually we have to kill him. We continue through several different new and interesting locations like the Artist's Rest, where we have a quick encounter with the Ink Demon himself. Oh, there he is! And the horrifying pit of insects that we have to fight for our lives in. Ah! This is horrible! Escaping that absolute nightmare fuel of an encounter, we push through a hallway with many different steel walls until eventually we get one of the most shocking reveals in the entire game.
I believe there's something special.
What the what? Huh? What? What?
Who are you?
What?
Don't you know me? Take a good
Joey! Nothing could have prepared me for just encountering Joey Drew in the middle of the game with no warning. Like, here we are traveling through the sewer system and bam, there he is! And the stuff we learn from him is incredibly interesting too. He talks to us about the cycle and how it was made, as well as our purpose in it. He explains the cycle as being like a record that plays over and over again, slowly wearing down over time and degrading as it continues to do so. He also explains that everyone in the cycle has a purpose, a reason to be there, and that it's up to Audrey to discover her own. After we learn all this from him, Audrey asks why he himself can't do anything to better this world, to fix what's happened. And he does give us an answer.
because I'm not the man. I'm just the memory.
Joey Drew died in 1971, and from the looks of things, his final moments on Earth were spent trying to put his own memories into the cycle, as a way to forever be a part of his own creation. This, as well as him just appearing at this point in the game, were massive reveals in the story that I never could have expected going into it, but somehow, what comes after this section of the game was infinitely more shocking. So, let's keep going. After we solve a small puzzle in Joey's area and killing some random cult leader named Amok, and he's dead. We move on to what may be my favorite visual in the entire series. A small lounge with a massive window overlooking a beautiful, bright city. And among all of this, our small pal Bendy, who reunites with us and decides to stick around for our little adventure. Traveling downwards past this lovely little lounge, we're able to enter the city that we saw in the window, exploring it with our adorable little friend and enjoying the scenery. And it's in this location that the biggest twist in the entire game happens. You see, while trying to get an ID to get past a gateway, we enter this small hotel where we once again are confronted by Joey Drew. He talks to us this time like he knows us, like he has an understanding of who we are. Naturally, Audrey is confused by this, but things only get crazier as he attempts to show us what he knows. What the? What? Huh? What? Huh? What? 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 What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening?
What is happening?
What's happening?
What is
What's happening? What's he showing me?
What is happening?
What? Huh? No! I know that sound effect!
All right, Joey.
No!
I'm here. Let's see if we can.
No! 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 No way! What? No! 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 That's right. We're taken back to where it all began, all the way back to chapter 1 of the original Bendy and the Ink Machine, so that Joey can tell us the truth about this game and the one that came before it. And the story he tells us, this twist, changes everything. Not only do we learn in this moment the truth of Audrey and the world we find ourselves in, but we get a concrete and canon explanation for the entirety of the original game. In this short cutscene, we get answers for all of the most glaring questions which were posed by not only the ending of Bendy and the Ink Machine, but also the game as a whole. Through this one cutscene alone, we learn that the entirety of the cycle was created as a means to torment a recreation of Henry Stein. Not the real one, but a recreation made by Joey himself for the purpose of tormenting. Every location, every event was designed and handpicked by Joey himself to torture Henry, to put blame on him, to make him believe that he was responsible for every bad event that caused the inevitable downfall of Joey Drew Studios. When his life began to fall apart, Joey was unable to come to grips with the fact that it was his fault. He wanted to blame someone. He wanted to feel like he was the victim of someone else's failure. And Henry was the one he chose, the business partner who left him to run the studio alone. All the environments we roamed through in the original game were chosen from the lowest moments in Joey's history, as if to point the finger at Henry and tell him, look what you've done. Look what you made me do. And he was to look at this display of all Joey's failures over and over and over again for all eternity. A constant hell designed to punish him for leaving Joey behind. This twist completely and totally changes the way we look at Bendy and the Ink Machine. It tells us outright the answer to one of our biggest questions. What did the ending mean? And it did so in a way that answered so many more questions with it. It explained why the studio was so massive, being a world made of Joey's memories rather than a literal studio. It explained the constant loop, being an endless hell meant to torture Henry, and it even explained the origin of one character in particular, that being Allison. You see, as Joey continues to tell the story, we find out that the bitterness and spite he felt towards Henry and his life in general began to ease after he eventually met a woman by the name of Allison Pendle. Her friendship brought joy back into Joey's life, made him happy again, or at least content with what he had. And it was through this friendship that he began to develop guilt for his actions in the past. He began to write to old friends, apologizing for his past mistakes, and he decided to try his hardest to ease the suffering of his version of Henry by giving him an Allison of his own, the good Alice we meet in Chapter 5. Allison brought Joey a whole new perspective on life, a whole new reason to try and be a better person, and in his final years, he decided to act on that. To use the ink machine to create something that he could truly be proud of. Something he could never have, but always wanted. A family. More specifically, a child. Using the ink machine, he created a daughter. A young girl to call his own, who he could cherish and spend the rest of his life with. He created Audrey. Yeah, not only do we get a twist that completely changes the way we see the original Bendy, but we also get a twist immediately after which changes the way we look at Audrey. All of her powers, everything she's capable of, the reason Wilson wanted her to come with him to the cycle, is all because she was made from the very ink that created it. Audrey is the first character in the whole series that is a true mix between the living ink of the ink machine and an actual human being. So close to being a real person that Joey was able to raise her as a daughter until he eventually passed away. These two twists are easily the biggest in the whole game. They take everything we knew about the Bendy franchise and completely flip it on its head, giving us a proper explanation to both Audrey's character and the story of the original game. We understand the ending now. We understand the world and its rules. We understand Joey as a character, and all of this improved on the experience that is the original game. This game alone changes Bendy and the Ink Machine for the better, with a simple cutscene right in the middle of it. And this was what inspired the entirety of the video you're watching right now. And with all of this said, what if I told you that another twist happens immediately after this? I am not joking. Right after we leave this hotel and have our entire view of the game and its world brought into question, this happens!
Of the cycle.
Bendy!
Without Allison. What? What? Huh? Huh? Oh god.
I already beat the story and I still don't buy any of it. So far everything sounds too good. Joey sounds too good. Always believing himself the good guy.
You were right!
I agree! Yes!
What? Yeah, just when you thought the twists were over, we find out that our little Bendy companion was actually the Ink Demon the entire time. Wilson never killed him, but rather he trapped the Ink Demon in this small, harmless body to never bother the cycle or him again. That is, until we showed up. Remember how I said to remember this moment? Yeah, this is why. You ever noticed how the moment we use our powers on baby Bendy, that was coincidentally when the Ink Demon first appeared? Yeah, that's because Audrey accidentally woke him up. We are the reason why the Ink Demon has returned, and now because of our actions, he's become a problem for us, the people of the cycle, and Wilson especially. This twist, as well as the other two which happened right before it, were so completely game-changing to me that I literally had to take a 5-minute break during my stream just to process all of it in my mind. These moments are absolutely insane, and I'll never forget the way I felt when I finally figured them out. Moving on from the chaos that was those two twists, though, after we discover the true identity of our little Bendy friend, we make our way into the portion of the world which is completely under Wilson's control. We have our first run-ins with the Keepers, and after narrowly escaping them, we find ourselves in an extremely interesting location. As we roam around, flipping switches as we find them, we discover different holding cells containing different characters from the original Bendy. We find the head of the projectionist, Sammy Lawrence, Bertram's disturbing disembodied head, oh, and this strange guy we've never met before. What? Henry! What? That's Henry!
Looking for answers.
It's Henry! Henry! Or I guess we have! Yeah, this was one of the biggest surprises in the whole game. Seeing Henry in person was one of the weirdest twists, and honestly, I really didn't expect for them to actually do it. For so long, the fans of the series, including myself, had so many different ideas for Henry's appearance, and then, in a room where we least expect it, there he is in the flesh. And the conversation we have with him is really interesting. Through Henry, we're able to learn that Wilson stored every single character who could potentially break the cycle here as a way to keep the world in his control. We also learn here how the cycle actually works. It doesn't just restart at the end of the story like we thought. No, instead the reset happens specifically when the Ink Demon itself is shown the reel labeled The End. The same one from the first game. By learning this, we know what our objective is now. find the reel hidden deep inside Wilson's lair, and reset the cycle to potentially create a better timeline. One where all the suffering he's caused can be brought to an end. We leave Henry in pursuit of this objective, first checking out who else Wilson is trapped in here that we may have missed. We can find other little tidbits like the seeing tool, Henry's old axe, and... Alice? Huh. Looks like she's missing. Hope that doesn't cause any problems for us later. Anyway, as we leave the area, we end up getting cornered by one of the keepers, who ends up actually capturing us. We black out, waking up on a train alongside Wilson. We find out he actually saved us, and it's here at the beginning of the final chapter that we begin to learn his true intentions. Or at least we think we do. He explains to us that the world we're currently trapped in is one where we can create whatever we want. One where we can play the role of God. But before that can happen, we have to control it, make it safe. And it's here that he asks Audrey for help to do that, and to supposedly help save his father's life. From here on out, we actually start to live with Wilson, sharing a mansion with him and trying to help him with whatever it is his plan is. It's also here we get to meet Betty, a housekeeper whose origin is kept a mystery to us, but she's very sweet, so who cares? On our first night here, we decide to try and get some well-deserved rest, going down a weird quest to make some sleeping medicine involving a fish and other random ingredients, until eventually we stand in front of the mirror to drink this stuff.
You are living with Wilson.
And now we've been kidnapped. I don't know how we could have seen that one coming. But yeah, Alice is back, and this segment of the game is one of my favorites. It's split into two parts, the first with us solving a puzzle with a very interesting solution, and the next with us trying to evade her firing at us mercilessly with a Tommy gun, all the while attempting to sneak up behind her to use our banishment ability. After we succeed at both, we get this cutscene where it seems like the end of the line, until a very similar set of events happen, with Allison saving us by stabbing her through the back. And this time around, Alice's death is far more tragic, but oddly bittersweet. As she dies in Allison's arms, she gets a moment to look at her face. A complete, perfect version of her face. And in that moment, dying on the floor, she realizes she really was beautiful. This moment is extremely heartbreaking, and what adds onto it immediately after is the note we find from Allison, where she tries her hardest to get through to Alice, to convince her that she doesn't need to spend her life obsessing over her looks and nothing else, before it's too late and she has to do something she doesn't want to. In that last moment, before Alice nearly kills us, it is too late. Allison could never get through to her before having to kill her, and now someone she views like a sister dies in her arms, with the last bit of closure she needs right there. She always was beautiful. She just couldn't see it before she'd gone too far. I mean, if she wanted someone to call her beautiful, all she had to do was come to me. I mean, I would have had no issues with... Okay, I'll stop. I'm sorry. Okay, right, yeah, video. Where was I? Oh, right, yeah. So after that tragic scene with Alice and stealthing our way past more keepers, we get back to Wilson's mansion where Betty tells us that Wilson is expecting us in his lab. Going down there, we reach the climax of the game, where Wilson's plan to kill the Ink Demon is properly explained, and we learn his real intentions. The story of saving his father, of wanting to help Audrey, all of that was a horrible lie. All this time, the reason Wilson wanted us to come to the cycle with him was for one reason and one reason only: to be sacrificed and become the very soul of his own inky creation, a monstrous recreation of a cartoon of his own design. By doing this to us, he believes that we could become a creature far stronger than Bendy himself, and control the cycle forever. It's also in this reveal that we learn of Wilson's true identity: the son of Nathan Arch, the owner of Archgate, and the new owner of Joey Drew Studios. And it's with this reveal and Wilson's intentions properly revealed to us that I would love to talk about why Wilson is such an excellent villain. Wilson, at first glance, seems like a very simple antagonist, a character driven to bring order to a world which he views as being chaotic, one who views himself as a savior, when in reality he does more harm than the monsters which already inhabit his new home. This, to an extent, does sum up Wilson for most of the game, but I feel like there's something more to him, something which we begin to understand in his final moments, which explains his true intentions and why he does what he does. And that is his overwhelming inferiority complex. In his final moments where he reveals his true identity to us, he speaks with nothing but bitterness towards his father, Nathan Arch. He tells us that he's lived his whole life under his shadow, wanting something more but never being able to surpass him. Sure, his scheme to replace the Ink Demon is one which lines up with his promises to protect the people of the cycle and bring order, but I don't think that's the reason he wants to do it. I believe that in the mind of Wilson, replacing the Ink Demon with a creation of his own, one which is revered by the creatures of the cycle like a god, is his way of surpassing his father and what he represents. I mean, think about it. The Ink Demon, Bendy, all the cartoons in this world belong to his father. Sure, they were made by someone else, but now they're Nathan Arch's property. Bendy, in Wilson's mind, represents his father, and by defeating him and overcoming him, he becomes the man he always wanted to be, but never could be, because in reality, Wilson is nothing but a talentless and pathetic person. Now, this may seem a little far-fetched at first, but I feel like the theme of feigning grandeur to make up for his own incompetence is something we see constantly with Wilson over the course of the campaign. His main claim to fame, killing the Ink Demon, was not only a lie in and of itself, but it was a lie he fabricated using technology that he didn't even create. Every single one of Wilson's achievements, controlling the cycle, killing the Ink Demon, creating the Keepers, they're all either fabrications to make himself look more prestigious and admirable than he actually is, or they're accomplishments he could only achieve through the work of others who came before him. The cycle and all the ink creatures he uses were created by Joey, the signal towers were created by Gent, and even his master plan to replace the Ink Demon with a god of his own design entirely hinges on Audrey. And as proof of this, when Audrey resists and Wilson is killed in the machine he intended to sacrifice her to, he starts to inhabit his creation like she was meant to, and it comes out horribly wrong. Its body is a mess of different cartoon parts, mechanical pieces, and bits of Wilson's corpse. And we see at the end of the fight with this monstrosity that it couldn't even compare to the strength of the Ink Demon. He was not a suitable host because there was nothing special about Wilson. Wilson is talentless, bitter, and spiteful towards those above him. He has no charisma, no future ahead of him, and nobody who even cares about him except the man he despises most. And he uses the cycle, a fantastical world left behind by a truly talented man, as an escape from his miserable reality. He tries to control it, to turn it into something of his own while pretending that he's really there to help it. And his master plan is all one massive coping mechanism, a way to convince himself that he really could overcome his father by creating something far more famous and beloved than Bendy ever was. Of course, this plan doesn't come to fruition, and as we destroy the signal towers in his boss arena, Wilson is killed by the Ink Demon and is never seen again. And with that, we arrive at the final moments of the Dark Revival. The final moment between Audrey and the Ink Demon is without a doubt my favorite moment in the entire game, because it feels like in this moment, for the first and only time in the series, we really understand who the Ink Demon is. He kneels over Audrey, berating her, mocking her, and yet trying to give her comfort in the fact that they, in many ways, are the same. But if we take a moment here to think about what he's saying, we start to understand the truth of this conversation. The things the Ink Demon says to Audrey aren't about her. They're about himself. In trying to make Audrey feel as low and as miserable as he is, the Ink Demon in this moment is projecting on her, telling her all of his greatest flaws to make her feel like they're one and the same, to give her comfort in the idea of joining with him and making him feel complete. Just look at what he says. He calls her a mistake, a person whose life is a terrible lie. This isn't true in the slightest. Audrey was quite literally designed by Joey to be exactly who she is. She was made with love and with care. Calling her a mistake in no way actually has any ground. But then, let's take a look at this line in the context of Bendy himself. Bendy was created in a lab accident, the first creation of the ink machine, who came out horribly wrong and was sealed away. He exists purely because they wanted to make an attraction out of him, and when he didn't come out right, he was locked up and tortured. With this context in mind, it suddenly makes this line in particular a lot more heartbreaking. Audrey and the Ink Demon couldn't be any further from one another, but he wants her to be a part of him. He wants her so that he can feel complete, and he wants to do it by making her feel like they're one and the same. So he projects on her, vents all of his problems onto her like they are her own, and tries to comfort her like he understands a deep pain that only the two of them have. He even reaches down to her in a gesture of kindness which perfectly parallels the first time these two characters met one another. And despite all the lies he tells, despite it all being an act so that Audrey will finally accept the Ink Demon and succumb to her own misery, she falls for it. She accepts his offer and the two of them unite. And mere moments later, we see how horrible of a mistake that was. She wakes as a part of him, confused and afraid. Her and Bendy are now one. He is complete and she will forever be a part of him. But just when it seems like all hope is lost, a familiar voice rings out from the silence to remind Audrey that there is still hope. Joey Drew, her father and mentor figure, the person who pushed her through this adventure, appears one last time to convince Audrey of the truth. He tells her everything she needs to hear, that she is loved, that she was made for a purpose, and as the Ink Demon kills Joey in an attempt to silence his words, it's too late. Audrey heard everything she needed to, and as she grabs the last tape and begins to control the Ink Demon's body, we begin the final section of the entire game. This final section in the game is one of the biggest love letters I have ever seen for a community like Bendy and the Ink Machine. In this final section, we control a much better looking version of Beast Bendy, smashing through walls and enemies in an attempt to make it to the final reel. All the way through, we get help from friendly faces we saw throughout the entire game. Allison and Tom aid us with opening doors and killing enemies. Porter appears to give us one last goodbye. Sammy appears only to get shot in the most hilarious way possible. Oh shit, Sammy just got shot! Sammy just got fucking shot! What? And at the end of it all, Henry himself appears one last time to help us get through the final door to escape. And as we make it to the end, we play the final reel on the projectionist's severed head, and the game comes to an end. What a fantastic and memorable way to end an amazing game. The spectacle of playing as Beast Bendy is insanely exciting the first time we see it, and getting the pleasure of giving one last goodbye to all of the characters we met along the way really makes the Dark Revival feel like one massive, fantastical adventure. Just when it seems like it can't get any better, right at the end, we see the old protagonist from the previous game, giving us the last bit of encouragement we needed before properly bringing this experience to a close. This section was such an exciting way to end the game that by the time I reached the end of it, I was nearly in tears. It really felt like everyone behind the game knew what made that original Bendy and the Ink Machine and its community so special, and tried to give us as much as we could possibly ask for in a neat little experience to close off an amazing game. As we play the last reel, the game starts over once again. The cycle continues like it always has, but now Audrey is in control. She can't fix everything, but she can make existing in the cycle a better and more bearable existence for everyone inside. And as we get one last look at our good friend Bendy, now living in the real world with us, the game comes to an end. I feel like it goes without saying that the story of Bendy and the Dark Revival far exceeds and improves upon everything that made the original game work. It's an emotional and complex adventure with many twists and turns that completely catch the player off guard in the best way possible. The characters that inhabit the world of this game are all charming in their own little ways, with many of them being extremely in-depth and having a lot to explore with them. And on top of all that, this game works to improve on the story and experience that is the original game by explaining it in ways that answer all of our most glaring and confusing questions, allowing both games to fit together in an amazing set. By the time the credits started rolling for this game, I was in tears. Not only because I loved the game I played, but because I was blown away by just how competent and emotional the story was. I'll never forget the first time I finished this story, and I greatly look forward to experiencing it again in future playthroughs. Bendy and the Dark Revival, despite being a game I was very nervous about as a diehard Bendy fan, blew me away in every single way. The game takes everything I loved about the original and doubles down on it, making those aspects stronger while also taking away many of its glaring flaws. The gameplay is far more complex and boasts a much better fundamental level design, one which is exciting to explore and rewards the player for returning later with new powers and abilities. The artwork and visuals are such a major step up, taking the charm of the original game and making it even better by building upon what made that game visually pleasing, while also adding new elements which made certain areas and characters far more striking. The horror far exceeds anything the original was capable of, with a much stronger atmosphere and several enemies which have some of the most terrifying mechanics I've seen in any horror game. And finally, the story of this game is one which not only is extremely well written in and of itself, but works to make the original game a more interesting and coherent experience as well. I loved every minute of playing this game. It may have been the most enjoyable experience I've ever had on stream, and without a shadow of a doubt, it takes the original Bendy's place as my favorite horror game of all time. Is it perfect? No, of course not. But that doesn't take away from everything that I love about it, and loved about the original game that came before it. If you haven't played The Dark Revival yet, I cannot recommend it enough. It's a game well worth the money paid for it, and I can't wait to play through it so many more times in the future. If it ends up being the final game in the Bendy series, then I'll be more than happy to accept that. If something else comes of this franchise though, I'll be sure to follow it with as much love and passion as I've poured into the last two games. If you've made it this far into this insanely long video, thank you so much for watching. Every word I spoke throughout this video came from a place of passion for this game and series, and I feel incredibly honored to have an audience to share my passion with. I look forward to seeing you in whatever my next project ends up being. Goodbye for now.